I didn't cry when my father died. I want to get that out of the way first, because people always ask. They want to hear that a son finally broke down, that the hard shell cracked, that there was love buried under all that silence. But I didn't cry. I was in my office when my sister Beth called. A Tuesday. I was grading papers, something about the agrarian reforms of the 1930s. I remember that because I stopped mid-sentence, a red pen in my hand, and she said, "He's gone." And I said, "Okay." That was it. Okay. Then I drove 4 hours to the farm. 4 hours of cornfields and grain silos and the sky getting wider and wider until I felt like a tiny speck in the rearview mirror. And all the way there, I wasn't thinking about his last breath or whether he suffered. I was thinking about a stone wall. I was 14. We had this wall at the edge of the property, a dry stack wall that my great-grandfather built. By the time I was a kid, it was half collapsed, overgrown with milkweed and poison ivy. My father looked at it one morning and said, "That'll need fixing before winter." He didn't say you. He didn't say we. He just said it, like a fact of nature. So I decided I would fix it. I spent every day that summer hauling rocks, chipping them with a hammer, fitting them together like a puzzle. I wanted to surprise him. More than that, I wanted him to see me. To see that I was the kind of son who could do that kind of work. I wanted him to nod, maybe even put a hand on my shoulder. When I finished, I went to find him. He was in the barn, sharpening a plow blade. I said, "The wall's done." He looked up, wiped his hands on his jeans, and walked out to look at it. I followed behind him, my heart beating so hard I could feel it in my ears. He stood there for a long time, hands on his hips. Then he spat a stream of tobacco juice onto one of the stones, looked at me, and said, "Took you long enough. Should have been done last month." That was the whole conversation. I remember standing there, the sun on my neck, the rocks I'd pulled from the ground and set straight with my own hands. And I remember thinking, I must be invisible. Not invisible like a ghost. Invisible like a tool. You don't praise a hammer for driving a nail. You just put it back in the box. So when Beth called me on that Tuesday, and I said, "Okay," it wasn't coldness. It was just, more of the same. A lifetime of being the hammer. The funeral was small. A few neighbors, a cousin I hadn't seen in 20 years. Beth handled everything. She was good at that, handling things. She'd stayed on the farm after high school, helped our father with the books, cooked his meals, listened to his complaints. I left at 18. I went to college, then grad school, then a teaching job in the city. I told myself I was escaping, and I was. But escape is just another word for leaving someone else to hold the bag. After the funeral, Beth asked me to stay for the reading of the will. I almost laughed. I assumed there was nothing left but debt and a falling down barn. But she had that look, the look she'd had since we were kids, whenever she was holding something back. Tight lips. Eyes fixed on a spot just past my shoulder. The lawyer was a man named Hargrove, who smelled of mothballs and had yellowed files stacked on his lap. We sat in the living room, on furniture that hadn't been updated since 1985. He read the will in a flat voice, as if he were reciting a grocery list. The farm went to Beth. 200 acres, the house, the equipment. Everything. And I got one item. A wood stove. A vintage, never-used cast-iron wood stove, still in its original crate from 1983. My father had bought it with the idea of modernizing the heating system, but he never installed it. It sat in the barn for 40 years, gathering dust, becoming a monument to deferred intention. And now it was mine. I looked at Beth. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Hargrove cleared his throat and said, "Your father was quite specific. He said, Liam always appreciated quality craftsmanship. He'll find a use for it." I didn't say anything. I just sat there, in that room that smelled of old wood and silence, and I felt the strangest thing. Not anger. Anger I could have worked with. Anger is a tool. What I felt was a kind of exhaustion, deep in my bones. I had spent 24 years building a life, a career, a marriage that ended quietly, a small apartment with books stacked to the ceiling, all of it to prove that I was someone. Someone worth seeing. And in the end, my father's final word to me was a cast-iron stove in a crate. After Hargrove left, I walked out to the barn. It was dusk, the light turning the dust motes into amber. There it was, the crate. Rough wood, nailed shut, the words Jotul number 118 stenciled on the side in faded letters. I put my hand on it. The wood was cold. I thought about all the things my father had never said. All the things he'd left unopened, unused, unfinished. And I thought, this is what he gave me. A thing that was never alive. I stayed there until the light was gone. Beth didn't come looking for me. That's how it had always been. We were two people orbiting the same absence, never quite touching. But I was wrong about the stove. I was wrong about everything. Because 2 days later, I pried that crate open. And what I found inside, well, that's when the story really begins. I told myself I was only staying a few days. Help Beth sort through the house, then drive back to the city, back to my life. But I couldn't leave. Not yet. The stove had gotten under my skin. I kept going out to the barn, standing in front of that crate, running my fingers over the stenciled letters. Beth noticed. She asked me what I was doing out there, and I said, just thinking. She gave me that look again, the tight lips, the averted eyes, and went back to clearing out our father's bedroom. We worked in silence for 2 days. She sorted his clothes into garbage bags. I packed his books into boxes. It was like being teenagers again, moving around each other in the same house, never saying the thing that needed to be said. And then, on the 3rd day, it finally came out. We were in the kitchen. She was scrubbing a stain on the countertop that had been there since I was a child. I said, "Beth, why didn't he leave me anything? Not even the land." She didn't stop scrubbing. "He left you the stove." "That's not an answer." She dropped the sponge. When she turned around, her face was red, her eyes wet. "You want an answer? Fine. You left. You got to leave. You went to college, you got your fancy job, your city apartment. You got to be the one who escaped. Do you know what that was like for me? Every day, every single day, he looked at me and said, if Liam had stayed, this place would be something. He blamed me, Liam, for you leaving. He said I wasn't enough to make you stay. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. You talk about injustice, she went on, her voice shaking. You talk about how he never saw you. But at least you got to leave. I had to live inside his silence. I had to sit at that table every night, making conversation with a man who couldn't say, thank you, or, I'm proud of you, or even, good morning, without it sounding like an accusation. So don't you dare stand there and tell me about injustice. The will isn't the injustice. The will is just a piece of paper. The injustice was mine. Every single day for 30 years. She walked out. The screen door slammed. I stood in the kitchen, the smell of bleach sharp in my nose, and for the first time in my adult life, I saw it clearly. Our father hadn't just failed to love us. He'd divided us. He'd made sure we could never be allies, never compare notes, never realize that his cruelty was a system, not a series of accidents. He pitted us against each other without ever raising his voice. And the will was his final move. Beth got the burden. I got the insult. And neither of us got each other. That night, I couldn't sleep. I went back to the barn. I brought a crowbar. I don't know what I expected. Some kind of catharsis, maybe. A chance to break something that belonged to him. I wedged the crowbar under the lid of the crate and pried it open. The wood groaned, nails screeching. I pulled the boards away, and there it was, the stove. A beautiful thing, really. Cast iron, ornate, with a little hinged door and a damper shaped like a leaf. But that's not what stopped my heart. Underneath the stove, packed in straw, was a metal lockbox. Rusted, but intact. I pulled it out. It wasn't heavy. I used the crowbar to crack it open, and inside was a story my father had spent his whole life trying to bury. A deed. Not to the main farm, but to a small parcel of land adjacent to it, 40 acres I'd never known about. A faded photograph of a young woman, not my mother, with dark hair and sharp cheekbones. And letters. Dozens of them, bundled with rubber bands that had turned to brittle glue. All unopened. All addressed to my father. The return address was a state penitentiary. I opened one. The handwriting was shaky, the paper thin. It was dated 1992. It started, "Arthur, I'm writing again because I need you to know I don't blame you. I never did. But I need to understand. You promised you'd come back. You promised you'd tell them the truth. 30 years is a long time to wait for a promise." I opened another. And another. The same handwriting, the same return address, spanning decades. The last one was postmarked 6 months ago. It said, "I'm an old man now, Arthur. I don't care about the land. I don't care about the money. I just want to hear your voice before I die. Just once. Call me. Please." I sat there in the barn, surrounded by straw and broken wood, holding a photograph of a woman who looked remarkably like me. And I understood, in a way that made the whole barn seem to tilt, that my father's injustice was not just to us. It was older. Deeper. He had built his entire life, his identity, his farm, his rigid morality, on a foundation of a lie. And that lie had a name. I looked at the return address again. The penitentiary was in the same state. 3 hours away. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the barn until dawn, reading every letter, memorizing the photograph, trying to piece together the shape of a man I'd never known. My father's brother. My uncle. A man named Eddie. And I knew what I had to do. I told Beth the next morning. I laid everything out, the deed, the letters, the photograph. I expected her to be angry. To tell me I had no right to dig up secrets. Instead, she sat down at the kitchen table, picked up one of the letters, and started to cry. Not the angry tears from the day before. Something quieter. Something like relief. "I knew," she said. I didn't know the details, but I knew there was something. The silence. The way he'd go out to the barn at night and just stand there. I thought it was us. I thought we weren't enough. I sat beside her. For the first time in our lives, we didn't talk about our father. We talked about Eddie. About what he must have endured, 3 decades in a prison cell, writing letters that were never opened. We talked about the photograph, the woman with the sharp cheekbones, Eddie's wife, maybe, or our grandmother. We didn't know. But we decided together that I would go. I would find Eddie, and I would hear his story. The drive to the penitentiary took 3 hours. I'd called ahead, explained who I was, sent a copy of the deed and the letters as proof. They let me in on a visitor's day. The room was gray, divided by glass. I sat down, and after a few minutes, they brought him in. Eddie was 67 years old. Frail, with thin white hair and the kind of tired eyes that have looked at the same walls for too long. But when he saw me, his face changed. He stopped. He stared. And then he said, "You're Arthur's boy. You look just like her. Just like our mother." I held up the photograph. "I found this. In a lockbox. With your letters." He pressed his hand against the glass. Not a gesture of desperation, more like a reflex, as if he was reaching for something he'd been reaching for his whole life. "He never opened them," Eddie said. It wasn't a question. "No," I said. "Never." Eddie nodded slowly. Then he told me the truth. They were brothers, he and Arthur. 2 years apart. Their father died when Eddie was 16, and Arthur took over the farm. But they were young and stupid, and they got into debt. One night, they broke into a shuttered factory to steal copper wire, a dumb crime, the kind of thing that seemed like a solution when you were desperate and 19. Someone called the police. Arthur ran. Eddie, the loyal younger brother, stayed. He thought Arthur would come back with a lawyer, with a plan. But Arthur never came. He let Eddie take the fall. And when Eddie was sentenced to 35 years, Arthur went back to the farm, claimed the land that should have been split between them, and built a life on the ruins of his brother's freedom. "He wrote me once," Eddie said. "Just once. A letter saying I should plead guilty, that it would be easier for everyone. I never answered it. I thought he'd come around. That he'd remember we were brothers. So I kept writing to him. Every year. Just to remind him I was still here." He paused. His voice was dry, like leaves rattling. "I stopped blaming him a long time ago. I just wanted to hear his voice. Just once." I sat there, in that gray room, and I felt the weight of it. The whole machinery of my father's life, the silences, the coldness, the way he withheld approval like a miser hoarding gold, it was all a performance. He was running. From that night, from his own fear, from his brother's face. And he ran so far and so long that he forgot how to stop. He forgot how to love. He forgot how to be anything other than the man who didn't run. I asked Eddie what he wanted. He said, "I get out in 18 months. I'd like to see a piece of that land. Just to stand on it. Not to take it. Just to stand there." I told him I'd make sure he could. When I got back to the farm, Beth was waiting on the porch. I told her everything. We sat together, watching the sun set over the fields our father had hoarded, and we made a decision. We weren't going to fight over the farm. The farm was poisoned, not the soil, but the story it held. We sold it. Not to a developer, but to a young couple who wanted to start a sustainable farm. We sold it for a fair price, and we used part of the money to set up a trust for Eddie. A small house, a small income. Enough for a man who'd waited 35 years to finally come home. And the stove? I took the stove. I loaded it into my truck and drove it back to the city. I found a blacksmith who restored it, cleaned off the rust, replaced the fire bricks, polished the iron until it glowed. I installed it in my apartment, right in the living room, where my books are. And when winter came, I lit the first fire. That's where I am now. Sitting beside it. Beth calls me every week. We talk about Eddie. He writes her now, long letters in that shaky hand. He's learning to use email. He'll be out in 3 months. I was thinking about what my father left me. At first, I thought it was nothing. A useless thing, a crate of dust. But now I see it differently. He left me a stove that was never used. And I chose to use it. I chose to make it burn. That's the inheritance, I think. Not the land, not the silence, not the injustice. It's the choice. You can let the fire go cold, or you can feed it. You can bury the truth in a lockbox in a barn, or you can carry it into the light. I'm not angry at my father anymore. I don't know if I ever was. Mostly, I'm sorry for him. He spent his whole life running, and he ended up exactly where he started. Alone. Surrounded by things he never opened. But me? I'm here. The fire's going. And for the first time, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be.